everyone, it is Jazz here. Welcome to part 2 of my February wrap-up. So part 1 was all about the manga that I read in the month of February. So if you want to check out some reviews of manga, definitely check that video out. I will link it wherever links go, all over the place. Now today I'm going to be talking about all the normal type books that I read in the month of February, and there were 3 of those, so let's jump into chatting about all those things. The first book that I have here to chat about that I completed was Needful Things by Stephen King. This is a story that takes place in a little town called Castle Rock, Maine, which apparently is often featured in Stephen King's stories. And in this town, a new store opens. This store sells your heart's desire, whatever that may be, but the sort of downside to that is that usually the items are sold at what they call in the summary, a nerve-shattering price. And I think that's an accurate description. On one hand, I think it is a really excellently written novel, but on the other hand, I found it to be a little bit of a harrowing experience. Now, Stephen King books are often sort of harrowing experiences, but I found this one like that much more so than I normally would. So I'm going to start with what I thought was great about this book. First of all, character development is flipping brilliant, but I always find that the character development in a Stephen King novel is flipping brilliant. I think particularly that is a good skill to have in this book because there are so many characters there. It's just basically like a whole town. So you're getting to see characters and you need to know what they're about right up in the front with not very many words, and it does that so well. You know exactly the personality and the types of things that a certain character would do and what their flaws are really quickly, and it's very beneficial to the type of story that this is. Also, what this does with being a small town is really excellent in terms of the build of the story. This build in the story is very much like a roller coaster. You have that slow click, click, climb, climb, where you're getting a little nervous, and then it drops, and it's insanity, and you're like, oh my gosh, I knew it was going to be insanity, but it is real insane. So I think the build of this is kind of a slow burn, but I wouldn't say that it's slow, but it needs to do that because he has to show what the different people in the town are like and what's kind of going on with Mr. Gaunt, who is the villain of the piece, and all those things have to be shown before the book can really have a cool climax and stuff. So I think the slow burn in this actually really works. Now, because of the plotting and the character building and the way it's done, I do feel like emotionally that is part of why it was a little bit of a harrowing experience. I knew early on in the book, just because of this different types of personalities in the story, that things were really going to clash and go badly, and that it was going to be just not good. And for some reason, that made it very hard for me to love the characters that you're supposed to love in this. I did like them. They're definitely good characters, and all those things, but I didn't love them the way I would love characters in It or The Stand or any of those things, basically because I just felt kind of hopeless for them. For some reason, I felt in this book that they were all going to die and it was going to be really hopeless, and even if somebody did live, I was going to feel unsatisfied because they would be so emotionally scarred by the experience that it wouldn't be even that good one in this. It just felt like evil was winning no matter what. And guess what? At the end, I felt exactly that way. And I do think it was because I felt afraid to attach myself to the characters just to have something horrible happen to them. I would put it down for really long periods of time, and that's why it took me 4 months to finish this book. It wasn't because it was long, it was because once I set it down, I kind of didn't want to pick it up again, even though it was really entertaining, and that's because it focuses on all the things about humanity that you just don't want to live with and that you dislike if you're a decent person. So it definitely does a good job, though, at focusing on those things, talking about the fact that, like, the darker side of humanity is, like, this greedy thing, and that, you know, if kind of manipulated, we would be basically killing each other over totally stupid crap. I just don't like to be reminded of that factor for 700 pages like I was in this book. So that has nothing to do with the quality of the book. That was just, you know, my personal view and the effect that the story did. It was like so good at showing that topic that I was like, oh man, I don't know if I want to pick that up right now because that's not enjoyment reading. Also, the imagery in this book is cray cray. I mean, it gets real ugly, guys. And, you know, you kind of expect a little bit of ugliness. It's a Stephen King book, but it gets real, like, wow, I feel kind of emotionally scarred just by this piece of fiction. In the end, I decided that the best way to rate this book was to rate it more on what I thought of the quality of the book than my actual emotional connection to the book, which was layered, as you can tell. So I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I think it's a very quality book in the way that it's written. It's just not something that I would probably pick up again. So that's why I docked a star. Next up, I completed Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. This is about a 26-year-old woman named Louisa Clark, and she is just happy living kind of a settled, not very exciting life. She works at a cafe, but then the cafe closes and she needs to get a job because her family really relies on her income. So she ends up taking a job as a caretaker for a quadriplegic man named Will, who doesn't feel like he has much to live for just because he was injured in an accident and is, of course, quadriplegic. And so it's basically about how these two characters relate to each other and how Louisa is trying to convince Will that there's something to live for in life. I checked this out at the library because I wasn't sure if I would really enjoy this book, just because I've seen the movie trailer. It's intrigued me just by the look of it, but I wasn't sure how far towards the romance genre the book was gonna go to based on that, and I wanted to read the book first before I watched the movie because I've heard that there's a lot more in the book, obviously, than the movie, because that's usually the case. So I picked this up at the library, gave it a try. I thought that I would probably like it. I ended up loving this book. I was pleasantly surprised. First of all, I really, really enjoy Jojo Moyes' writing style. I think she has this very nice skill of being able to make you feel the feelings and the mood you are supposed to feel exactly in the scene that she's written, and I think that's a really cool skill. But also, I just in general love the words that she chooses. She kind of has a nice mix of being simple and complex, and it's just a nice mix to tell this story. And another thing about the writing that she does is she uses this tool where she changes point of view during the story. So most of the book is written from Louisa's point of view, but there are certain times when she changes point of view to maybe Will's mother or Louisa's sister or different things like that. And I really appreciated that as a tool, just because there were maybe scenes that were too painful for Louisa to talk about, or there were just point of views that you needed to discuss, that you needed another character for, and I think she integrated all the different points of view in the story really well. Now, also, I was extremely invested in the characters in this book. The characters and the writing both made this book really hard for me to put down. I read it in hardly any time at all, and it was mostly just because I was so compelled to pick it up, and when I wasn't holding it in my hands and reading it, I was thinking about the book. And it's, a pretty simplistic story, but I think because of the structure and the characters, I was just really invested in them. Also, the characters have some really nice dialogue. It's kind of a nice mix of dry wit and also like some deep emotional pull stuff. Speaking of emotional pull, I'm 2 months into the year. I've already found a second book that has made me sob like a baby. You know I don't cry that much. And I was like, guess I just keep finding these books that make me sob. But I think that basically shows yet again how invested I was in Louise's story and Will's story. Now, another thing that I really liked about this book is that it's got a love story in it, but it's not solely a love story. I feel like this has more in common in terms of themes with coming of age kind of novels. I think that really added a cool layer for me, since I'm not somebody that's like super into romance all the time. So I really appreciated that that was more what the focus of the book was, about how these two characters change each other, even though there is sort of a love story aspect to it. This book also really showed something to me about people that are wheelchair bound or people with disabilities, and that is the fact that the world is just not very good at being accessible to people that are disabled, whether they be quadriplegic, paraplegic, etc., etc. There are so many issues with how they can like get around. There's not a lot of places with wheelchair access, and so it's very hard for, you know, somebody with Will's issues to go out and just do something, and also how you're sort of looked at as different and things like that, and how that makes, you know, spending time in the world even more difficult, because it's already difficult to get around, and then there's that added layer. And it just really was something that you just don't think about as somebody that is able-bodied, and I think it's a really important thing to think about. And also it does show, of course, how difficult being wheelchair bound is in terms of a medical aspect. Now, this book may not be for everyone, because it does feature what I think are some potentially triggering sort of topics, or topics that people are going to definitely have issues with. The main one being that it does discuss assisted suicide. I'm the kind of person that really likes the psychology of characters and people, so I'm willing to read and hear both sides of the argument and just go and see what the characters think of the topic. But if you're not somebody like that, if you're somebody that does, you know, not want to enter that topic, and, you know, you're concerned about what, you know, people that are disabled might think of this topic or something like that, I think maybe this book isn't for you. There are also some things that I can't talk about because they're spoilers in this book that are also really difficult topics. It didn't personally bother me that those things were in the story. I think they added a interesting layer to the story, but, you know, it depends on the kind of person you are. The only thing that I would say about this book that maybe wasn't my favorite thing about it is that it does contain one or two tropes that are in a lot of contemporary kind of books that I'm not the hugest fan of, but the way they were written actually made them work in the story. So while they weren't my favorite things, I didn't want to dock like a ton of stars for them, if that makes sense. So in the end, I ended up giving this 5 stars on Goodreads. I'd probably say, if I'm getting real nitpicky about it, I might rate it like a 4.75 for that trope thing that I was talking about. But I still think that I really loved the characters and this book. I also think that I will go ahead and try After You and Still Me, which are the sequels to this book. I can't see them being as good as this one, but I still want to give them a try because I like the main character and all that stuff, and I want to see what goes on. The last book that I completed was Any Known Blood by Lawrence Hill. This is about a 38-year-old man named Langston Kane. He is not living his best life. He has gotten divorced. He's having issues with his father, who thinks that he's just kind of not meeting his, you know, expectations. And then he gets fired from his job writing political speeches. So he decides that he's going to move from his home in Canada to Baltimore to talk to his estranged aunt, Mill, who is basically the person to go to who has information about his father's family line, and he wants to write a book about his father's family line. So the book switches from Langston's life in 1997, because I feel like it's very much set in that year, because that's when this was written, to historical accounts that Langston writes about his father's ancestors. I ended up buddy reading this with my friend Mark. He has a Goodreads. I will link you to his Goodreads. And it is a good discussion book, but I wouldn't say it's like the best book ever. It's just like an average, okay, it's all right kind of book. Focusing on the good elements, I do think this is an excellent discussion book. I could really see people reading this in book clubs and finding a lot of things to chat about, because not only does it have those historical elements, which I found really interesting because it does really show points in history and what African American or, Black people were doing during those time periods, such as the 1800s or during World War I. Also, because the character is mixed race, I found it really interesting as a mixed race person. My mother is Black and my dad is white, so I have the opposite colors as the main character in this book. But it was interesting to compare our experiences. I wouldn't say that a lot of his experiences were similar to mine, but it definitely made me think about different things about how I grew up and different things about how this main character grew up. This also discusses race relations, which can be quite interesting, and it's not just between people that are Black and people that are white. It's also with different cultural differences between being somebody that maybe is from Africa and somebody that is Black but was born in Canada or America, or how maybe things are maybe different if you're a Black person that grew up in Canada or if you're a Black person that grew up in America. The thing about this book is that the thing that I liked most about this book was also the thing that I didn't really like about this book. It's really awesome that it switches between sort of the historical elements and the 97 elements, and I quite liked the historical moments. The problem with that was, I liked the historical parts considerably more than I liked anything that was going on with the main character and his life in modern-esque times. And also, because it switches back and forth, it makes the narrative really all over the place. Not confusing, mind you. I wasn't confused. But it kind of makes it kind of go like not in a normal arc of a story. It ends up being that this book never has a climax to the story in all of these 500 pages. And it's not boring, but it's still, you're not getting a good story arc to it, and it kind of like kills the love a little. I will say though that for a 500-page book, it does read pretty quickly, and I do really like the writing style of the book, and that was what kept me somewhat engaged. So even though I don't think this particular book is a hit with me, I think I would definitely try another Lawrence Hill book, strictly for the fact that I enjoyed his writing style, and also strictly for the fact that that I don't like epistolary sections in books super a lot. And this one, I actually did like the letters and diaries in this, so it wins some points for that. And probably the main thing that I don't love about this book is that the main character is so freaking boring. Like, oh my gosh, Langston is so boring. He's so boring that even when exciting things happen to him, I couldn't even believe that exciting things were happening to him. And things that were exciting did happen. Allotted to his past actions didn't make a lot of sense to me because the author didn't fully explain where the main character's mind was at when he did certain things. So I feel like that made him not as likable as a character as the author intended. Another thing about this is that the female characters aren't always very well developed at all either. I feel like Mill, his aunt, is extremely well developed. And actually a lot of the side characters in general are well developed. Probably better developed than the main character, which is like a But a lot of the female characters are really one-dimensional, and it's not that you know, I needed this heck a ton of development because a lot of it is sort of, you see them for not very long. But I would have appreciated the females not seeming like they were just there to be like, fill a role. You know what I mean? I also didn't love the end of this book, particularly the last chapter. I felt like it was very rushed and kind of thrown together, and it didn't really like become cohesive to me. Like, it had an ending at least, and it made sense, but I just feel like it could have been better done. So basically I gave this 3 stars. It's your typical 3-star book. It has some really great things, but it equally has a lot of things that I didn't think were so great about it. Now, one thing though that is pretty good is the audiobook. I switched between reading this and listening to it in audiobook, and I actually kind of prefer the audiobook for some reason to this, mostly because I really like how the reader read it. And I did, usually on 3-star books, I don't keep the audiobook, but I did keep the audiobook. Those were my thoughts on all the books that I read in February. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found my commentary interesting on all these things, and I will see you all soon. Thank you for watching.